Let us begin this long, quiet journey into the strange, intricate, and surprisingly logical world of the past. Find a comfortable position, let the light in the room soften, and allow your mind to drift back through the centuries, to a time where life was governed by bells, dictated by wool, and measured by the slow turning of the seasons. This is not a story of kings and battles, but of the countless ordinary lives that formed the tapestry of an era, and the peculiar rules that kept them from unraveling. Imagine the first light of dawn, not as a gentle awakening, but as a faint gray smear against a single small opening in a wall of wattle and daub. The air is thick with the scent of cold earth, wood smoke from the previous night's fire, and the distinct pungent aroma of the straw that spills from your mattress. You rise because the sun, however hidden, commands it, and because the land does not care for your weariness. Your hands, already calloused and rough, reach for the day's clothes. There is no choice to be made, no selection from a wardrobe. There is the tunic, woven from coarse, undyed wool, its texture like a persistent whisper of irritation against your skin. There are the leggings, patched and repatched until the original fabric is a forgotten memory. This is not a matter of poverty alone. It is a matter of law. You are living under the vast, invisible net of sumptuary legislation. A system of rules so precise it dictates the very threads you are allowed to wear. The logic, from the perspective of those in power, is one of visible order. A society, they believe, is like a human body, with each part having its designated place and function. The king is the head, the knights are the arms, the clergy the soul, and you, the peasant, are the feet, firmly planted in the mud that feeds them all. If the feet were to dress as the hands, the entire body would become confused, its harmony disrupted. But beyond this philosophical justification, there is a brutal economic practicality. The economy of the realm is a delicate vessel, and wealth must flow in predictable channels. If you, a tiller of the soil, were to spend your meager earnings on a piece of silk ribbon or a bolt of fine Flemish cloth, that coin is not going to your lord's rent or the king's tax collector. It is being wasted, siphoned away from its proper destination. Furthermore, these laws often serve to protect domestic industries. England produced magnificent wool. Therefore, laws might mandate the use of English wool over imported fabrics, a form of medieval protectionism. So you wear your station. The gray, brown, or dull russet of your tunic is a walking proclamation of your place, a constant, scratchy reminder that ambition, even in the privacy of your own appearance, is a dangerous spark that the authorities are keen to extinguish. As the day progresses, the hollow feeling in your stomach becomes a familiar companion. Your mind, dulled by relentless labor, wanders to thoughts of food. You imagine the rich, savory taste of pork, the sizzle of bacon in a pan, the hearty substance of a beef stew. But then your gaze falls upon a roughly carved calendar stick, notched to mark the passage of time. It is a Friday, or perhaps it is the season of Lent, or the eve of a saint's day you can't name. The church, whose authority reaches into your hut as surely as the sunlight, has decreed that on this day, and on nearly half the days of the year, meat is forbidden. The reason given from the pulpit is one of spiritual discipline, a taming of the flesh to elevate the spirit, a shared penance that binds the community in faith. But the unspoken, profoundly practical reason is one of stark biological necessity. The cow in the field is not merely a walking larder. It is a source of milk, of cheese, of leather for shoes and harnesses. It is the engine that pulls the plow, and its manure is the lifeblood of the field. Its value alive, working and reproducing, is incalculably greater than its value as a single meal. If every peasant family, in a moment of hunger, slaughtered its livestock, the entire agricultural system would collapse within a season. There would be no oxen for the spring plowing, no calves for the next year, no milk for the children. The church's enforced fasting was a brilliant, if unintentional, form of continent-wide resource management. It preserved the capital of the medieval world, its livestock, ensuring the survival of the system itself. It also created and sustained entire economies. Towns like Great Yarmouth grew wealthy on the herring trade. Monasteries became centers of fish farming, managing complex ponds and preserving vast quantities of fish for the lean times. So, you sit down to your evening meal. The smell of pickled herring, salty and sharp, fills the single room. You break a piece of dense, dark barley bread, its coarse texture a testament to the miller's craft. It is monotonous, it is unsatisfying, but as you chew, you are participating in a vast, invisible system that stretches from the North Sea fishing boats to the Vatican itself. You are not just eating, you are obeying God, propping up the economy, and ensuring that the precious, plodding ox in the field will be there to help you wrest a future from the unyielding earth. The work is ceaseless, a cycle of planting, weeding, and harvesting that bends your spine and numbs your mind. When the sun finally begins to bleed below the horizon, you retreat to the fragile sanctuary of your home. The hearth, a simple stone-lined pit in the center of the room, is the true heart of this space. Its flickering light pushes back the encroaching darkness, and its warmth is a fragile defense against the damp chill that seeps through the walls. You settle before it, your body aching, grateful for this small, elemental comfort. And then it comes. The sound is not a gentle chime, but a commanding metallic clang that reverberates through the very timbers of your hut. It is the curfew bell. Its message is simple, absolute, and non-negotiable. Cover your fire. The day is over. The reason for this nightly ritual was as practical as it was terrifying. Your entire world was constructed of fuel. The timber frames, the wattle and daub walls, the roofs of dried thatch, they were all waiting for a single spark to transform a sleeping village into a roaring inferno in a matter of minutes. There were no fire engines, only bucket chains that were often pathetic gestures against a wind-whipped blaze. Prevention was the only true defense. So at the sound of the bell, you would rise, take your shovel, and carefully cover the glowing embers of your hearth with dirt or ash. You would snuff out the tallow candle, its faint, greasy light extinguished. Your home would be plunged into a profound and utter blackness, a darkness so complete you could feel its weight. This was not for your comfort or to ensure a good night's rest. It was a collective sacrifice for communal survival. The bitter irony was that this rule did not apply to the Lord in his stone manor house, with its slate roof and chimneys designed to contain fire. His world was not governed by the same primal fear. For you, the night became a time of stumbling in the black, of listening to the scuttling of rats in the roof thatch, of lying awake on your straw mattress, waiting for the dawn. The curfew was a tyrant that traded your evening's peace for the security of the community, a small, daily offering to the capricious god of fire. Perhaps, on a day when the hunger is a sharp, persistent pain, your eyes are drawn to the dark, brooding line of the forest that marks the edge of the cultivated land. You see a rabbit, plump and oblivious, hopping through the undergrowth. It is a perfect package of meat, a gift from nature. Your mouth waters. You glance around. No one is watching. The thought of a snare, of a secret return after dark, of a real stew for your family flashes through your mind. This thought, this fleeting fantasy, is a crime. That rabbit and every other living creature in that forest, the deer, the boar, the birds, even the fish in the stream, does not belong to you. It does not belong to the forest itself. It belongs to the Lord. This was forest law, some of the most harshly enforced and deeply resented legislation of the age. The forest was a legal term, not an ecological one. It could encompass villages, farmland, and moors, all falling under a special jurisdiction designed to protect the beasts of the chase for the exclusive pleasure and profit of the king or a local noble. Poaching was not simple theft. It was a direct challenge to the Lord's authority, a personal insult, and a theft of his property. The punishments were brutal, theatrical in their cruelty, and meant to be etched into the community's memory. Blinding, mutilation, hanging. The Domesday Book records the death penalty for taking a stag. For a rabbit or a pheasant, the fines could be crippling, plunging a family into debt for generations. The law was enforced by foresters, wardens, and gamekeepers, men who knew the woods intimately and had the power to arrest, try, and sometimes summarily punish offenders. The logic from the noble perspective was rooted in culture and status. Hunting was not a hobby. It was a vital social and political ritual, a way to train for war, to display martial prowess, to reinforce bonds among the elite, and to demonstrate their dominion over nature. The game in the forest was their recreational resource, and a peasant taking a deer was an intolerable intrusion, a blurring of the lines that was as dangerous as it was disrespectful. Yet people still poached. The gnawing emptiness in their bellies was a more powerful motivator than the fear of the law. Whole villages would sometimes conspire in secret nighttime hunts, using silent snares and nets to avoid the baying of hounds and the sounding of horns. It was a dangerous rebellion, a quiet, desperate reclamation of a resource they felt was unjustly withheld. So you turn away from the rabbit. The hollow feeling in your stomach is now joined by a deeper, colder ache of resignation. The very animals of the wild were subjects of a different master, and to touch them was to touch the untouchable, to challenge the very foundation of your world. Disputes are inevitable in a life lived so close to the edge. A missing tool, a damaged fence line, a chicken that has wandered into a neighbor's plot and not returned. And if you are accused, you will face a system of justice that seems, to a modern mind, like a descent into surreal brutality. This was the era of the trial by ordeal. The underlying logic was that God, in his infinite wisdom, knew the truth of any matter, and he would intervene to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. The ordeal was a direct physical appeal to this divine judgment. Your guilt or innocence would be determined not by evidence or witness testimony, but by your body's ability to withstand a test. In the ordeal of fire, you would be forced to carry a red-hot iron bar a set distance, usually 9 feet. Your seared hand would then be wrapped and sealed by the priest. After 3 days, the bandages were removed. If the wound was healing cleanly, it was a sign of God's favor, and you were innocent. If it was festering, swollen with infection, you were guilty. Given the complete lack of antiseptic knowledge and the filthy conditions of daily life, infection was nearly a certainty, making a verdict of innocence a genuine miracle. Then there was the ordeal of water. You would be bound, often with your right thumb tied to your left big toe, and lowered into a consecrated pool or river. Water, as a pure element, was believed to reject the sinful. If you sank and were thus accepted by the pure water, you were innocent and would be quickly pulled out, hopefully before drowning. If you floated, rejected by the water, you were guilty and would face the prescribed punishment, often hanging. For the nobility, there was the trial by combat, where the accuser and the accused would fight, often to the death, with the belief that God would grant victory to the righteous party. This, of course, heavily favored the stronger, better armed, and more skilled warrior, turning justice into a brutal lottery of birth and training. To us, this seems like sheer, superstitious barbarism, yet in its context, it served a purpose. In a world with weak central authority, no police force, and fragile social bonds, the ordeal provided a definitive, community-sanctioned way to resolve disputes that might otherwise fester and escalate into devastating blood feuds. The sheer public terror of the ritual brought a powerful, unquestionable finality. Once God had spoken through your burned or unburned flesh, the matter was considered closed. There was also a psychological dimension. It is believed that the priests who administered the rites could sometimes manipulate the outcome based on their own intuition or the confessions of the accused, using slightly cooler irons or different binding techniques to steer the divine verdict. By the 13th century, the Church, growing more confident in its own judicial procedures, began to ban clerical participation in ordeals, and the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 effectively spelled their end, paving the way for the jury system. But for centuries, this was the pinnacle of justice for the common person. Your fate rested not on your word or your character, but on the resilience of your skin and the whims of unseen bacteria. It was a system that demanded absolute blind faith, for the only alternative was to believe that the world was governed by random, meaningless cruelty. A thought perhaps more terrifying than the hot iron itself. The rhythm of your life is not your own. It is dictated by the sound of the church bell. It tears you from sleep for matins, calls you to labor, signals your meager meals, and orders you to bed with a curfew. It is the metronome of the medieval world, a constant external pulse regulating your existence. You are a slave to its sound, your life a series of conditioned responses to its relentless bronze voice. It structures the formless chaos of an illiterate society, carving the endless, intimidating day into manageable, controllable chunks. This auditory control is a subtle but profound form of power, a reminder that your time, your labor, and your very consciousness are not your own to command. If you were to dream of escaping the drudgery of the fields, of learning a trade and becoming a blacksmith, a carpenter, or a baker, you would quickly encounter another formidable wall, the guilds. You could not simply set up a forge and start hammering. You had to enter the guild system, a medieval combination of a trade union, a regulatory body, and a secret society. The guilds controlled everything: the quality of goods, the prices, the wages, and, most importantly, who was allowed to practice the trade. To become a master craftsman, you would spend years as an apprentice, performing menial tasks for little more than food and lodging. Then you would become a journeyman, traveling to hone your skills while still working for a master. Finally, you would have to produce a masterpiece, a piece of work of the highest quality, to be judged by the existing masters of the guild, men who had every economic incentive to keep their ranks exclusive and limit competition. It was a system designed to maintain high standards and provide stability for its members. But for the ambitious outsider, it was a nearly insurmountable barrier. Your livelihood was not in your hands. It was in the hands of the guild masters, who guarded their privileges with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its hoard. Even in death, the rules do not release you. Where and how you are buried is a final reflection of your standing in the community. A proper burial in consecrated ground within the churchyard requires fees for the grave plot, for the priest services, for the candles that are meant to guide your soul. If you are too poor, your body might be consigned to a pit outside the hallowed ground, an anonymous end for an anonymous life. The churchyard itself was often a crowded, reused space. After a few years, your bones might be dug up and stacked in a charnel house, a ossuary to make room for the newly deceased. Your final resting place was, like your life, temporary and contingent on your ability to pay. For those who died by suicide or were executed for crimes or died excommunicated, the fate was worse. Burial at a crossroads with a stake through the heart, or in an unconsecrated ditch, a final eternal mark of disgrace. The social hierarchy persisted beyond the grave, a last chilling reminder that your place was fixed forever. This was the intricate, often oppressive, web of the medieval world. A world of constraints where every aspect of life, from the cloth on your back to the food in your bowl, from the fire in your hearth to the plot of your final rest, was governed by rules that seem bizarre and arbitrary to us. But they were not arbitrary. They were the hard-won, often brutal solutions to the fundamental problems of survival in a precarious age. They were attempts to prevent catastrophic fire, to manage scarce resources, to maintain a rigid social order that provided a fragile stability, and to resolve conflicts in a world without our modern tools of investigation and justice. It was a world where the individual was subsumed by the collective, where personal freedom was a concept not yet born, and where the path of least resistance was often the only path to see another sunrise. And as we drift deeper into this historical current, we can let our minds wander to the very edges of this world, to the places where these rules stretched, frayed, and transformed into something else entirely. We can think of the Vikings, those fierce, restless explorers from the north, whose society operated on a different, but no less strict, set of logics. Consider the saga of Eric the Red, a man of formidable temper and ambition, exiled from Norway for manslaughter, and later from Iceland for another killing. With nowhere else to go, he sailed west into the unknown, discovering a land of breathtaking beauty and brutal severity, a landscape of jagged fjords, towering glaciers, and valleys that were green for only a few short weeks a year. He named it Greenland. This was not a description, it was an advertisement, a masterstroke of propaganda. He knew that no one would follow him to a place called Iceland's second, even colder. So he promised greenery, fertility, and hope. It was a lie, but it worked. He convinced hundreds of settlers to brave the treacherous North Atlantic voyage in open longboats, carrying their livestock, their tools, and their dreams. For over 4 centuries, the Norse clung to that green lie on the edge of the world. They built their homes not from wood, which was scarce, but from turf, great blocks of earth and grass stacked into thick-walled, insulated dwellings. They lived on seals, caribou, and the precious sheep they could pasture in the short summer. They traded walrus ivory and narwhal tusks back to Europe for the iron and timber they so desperately lacked. Their existence was a testament to human adaptability and stubbornness, a society built on a foundation of clever marketing and sheer will. And then slowly, silently, they vanished. A cooling climate, conflicts with the Inuit, the collapse of the ivory trade, and their own refusal to fully adapt to the Arctic environment led to their demise. Their empty stone churches and collapsed farmsteads stand as silent, wind-scoured monuments to a rules-based society that ultimately lost its long battle with an indifferent nature. We can travel in our minds to the ancient peoples of the Balkans, the Illyrians, whose marriage customs were a complex dance of politics, economics, and sacred ritual. For them, marriage was never a matter of personal affection. It was a contract between clans, a way to seal peace after a feud, to secure military allies, or to consolidate grazing lands and wealth. Elders, the repositories of tradition and strategy, arranged the unions. Negotiations could be long and delicate, involving the exchange of dowries, livestock, weapons, finely woven textiles that represented the strength and status of each family. The bride was the central figure in this ritual, adorned in heirlooms and symbols of fertility, her body a living bond between 2 lineages. The ceremonies were lavish, public affairs, filled with music, rhythmic dancing, and feasting that could last for days. It was a system that prioritized the survival and strength of the group over the fleeting desires of the individual, a pattern of alliance building that has echoed through human history in countless forms. The joy of the wedding was real, but it was a joy rooted in the security of a new alliance, the promise of children to continue the clan, and the reaffirmation of a shared identity. And we can contemplate the epic life of Harold Hardrada, a man who was perhaps the last great Viking. His story reads like a saga composed by the gods themselves. A giant of a man, he fought as a young warrior at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030, where his half-brother, King Olaf Haraldsson, was killed. Wounded and with a price on his head, the 15-year-old Harold fled Norway, a fugitive. He found his way east to the glittering, unimaginable wealth of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. There, he joined the Varangian Guard, the elite personal bodyguard of the emperor composed primarily of Norse and Anglo-Saxon mercenaries. For over a decade, he fought across the empire, from the sun-baked walls of Sicilian cities to the holy city of Jerusalem, from the bulwarks of Asia Minor to the palaces of the capital itself. He amassed a fortune in gold, silks, and jewels, and a reputation for ferocity and cunning that spread throughout the known world. But his ambition was for a throne, not just wealth. He returned to the north a legendary figure, reclaimed his stored treasure from the court of Prince Yaroslav the Wise in Kiev, and through a combination of force, diplomacy, and sheer will, carved his way to the throne of Norway. For nearly 20 years, he waged a relentless, draining war against Sweden Estridsson of Denmark, a conflict of raid and counter-raid that exhausted both kingdoms but satisfied Harold's insatiable thirst for power. Yet it was not enough. In 1066, hearing of a succession crisis in England, he saw his ultimate prize. He believed he had a claim to the English throne based on a complex and tenuous agreement between his predecessor and a Danish king. He assembled a massive fleet, perhaps 300 ships, and sailed for England, allied with the rebellious brother of the new English king, Harold Godwinson. He landed in the north, and at the Battle of Fulford Gate, he crushed the English forces of the northern earls. York surrendered to him. He stood on the brink of a victory that would have reshaped the map of Europe. But King Harold Godwinson, in a feat of incredible speed and logistics, marched his army north, covering over 180 miles in just 4 days. He caught Harold Hardrada completely by surprise at Stamford Bridge. In the fierce battle that followed, an English arrow found its mark in the giant Norse king's throat. Harold Hardrada, the thunderbolt of the north, fell. His army was annihilated. Of the great fleet that had set out, only 24 ships were needed to carry the survivors home. His death on September 25, 1066, marked the definitive end of the Viking Age. Just 19 days later, William the Conqueror would win the Battle of Hastings and seize the English crown. Harold's life was a monument to a specific set of rules: the rule of the strong, the code of the warrior, the relentless pursuit of glory and wealth. He lived by those rules, and in the end, he died by them. His colossal ambition finally shattered on an English field, a dramatic and fitting end to the era he embodied. These stories, these rules, these lives, they are all part of the same vast, slow-moving river of history. They are the patterns that humans weave to bring order from chaos, to find meaning in hardship, to build structures that allow them to survive in a world that is often indifferent and unforgiving. The scratch of the wool tunic, the taste of salted fish, the sound of the curfew bell, the heat of the ordeal iron, the silence of the Greenland settlement, the rhythm of the Illyrian wedding dance, the finality of the arrow at Stamford Bridge. They are all threads in the same immense and quiet tapestry. And as you listen to these echoes from the past, let them lull you. Let them carry you away from the immediate concerns of the present and into a deep and restful sleep where the rules are simple and the reasons are, for now, enough. The night is long and history is patient. It has no need for you to remember, only to rest. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift like autumn leaves on a still pond, and let the weight of these centuries press gently upon your eyelids, guiding you down, down into the soft, silent dark, where the past is a dream and sleep is its gentle keeper. Dot. Let us settle in for a much deeper exploration, a truly extensive and meandering journey through the labyrinth of medieval regulations. We will linger on each detail, unpacking the logic, the atmosphere, and the profound, often absurd implications of a world where order was imposed with a heavy and sometimes bewildering hand. Prepare for a long, quiet, and detailed immersion. The previous rules we discussed, the sumptuary laws that dictated your wardrobe like a divine uniform code, the curfew that plunged your world into nightly darkness for the sake of collective safety, the church's dietary decrees that turned your stomach into an instrument of both penance and economic policy. These were the grand overarching themes of control. They were the major chords in the symphony of medieval society. But now we must listen for the subtler, more intricate melodies, the counterpoints of bureaucracy that govern the minute and the mundane, revealing a mindset that believed no aspect of human existence was too trivial for legislation, nor too strange for the long arm of the law to reach. Let us begin in the profound, star-flecked blackness of a moonless night. The curfew bell has been silent for hours. The village is not just asleep, it is entombed in a silence so deep you can hear the rustle of a fox in the thatch or the scuttling of a beetle across the earthen floor. But this darkness is not ungoverned. From the deepest shadows, a solitary figure materializes, his approach heralded not by a drumbeat, but by the soft, scuffing sound of worn leather on cold cobblestone. He carries a hooded lantern, its single candle casting a frail, jittering pool of light that seems only to deepen the surrounding gloom. This is the night watchman. He is likely a tradesman by day, a cobbler or a carpenter, fulfilling his compulsory rota of civic duty. His presence is a testament to the community's deep-seated fear of the night. His official duties are twofold, both equally vital to the medieval psyche. He is a living, breathing fire alarm, his senses attuned to the first faint scent of smoke that could spell doom for the entire tinderbox community. And he is a mobile deterrent to the crime that flourishes under the cloak of darkness. He calls out the hours, his voice a lone, mournful chant in the vast silence. 2 of the clock, and all is well. But his true power lies in his right to challenge any soul found abroad without a legitimate purpose or a light of their own. To be stopped by him is a disconcerting experience. You are pulled from your private mission into the public sphere, forced to justify your existence under the flickering, judgmental light of his lamp. He is the embodiment of communal suspicion, a humble, underpaid, and often weary guardian, standing on the fragile wall between order and chaos. Now let the first gray light of dawn seep into the sky and follow a man of some substance, a guildsman, perhaps, who has profited from the wool trade as he prepares to face the new day. He stands before a polished sheet of bronze, a poor man's mirror, and makes a conscious decision. He will not shave. This is more than a mere grooming choice. It is a social statement, a declaration of status, and a financial commitment. For in many realms, particularly in Russia under the modernizing zeal of Tsar Peter the Great, but also in the spirit of various European levies, to wear a beard was to wear a tax receipt. Peter famously imposed a beard tax to force his nobility to shed their backward Russian appearance and adopt the clean-shaven fashions of Western Europe. The concept, however, was rooted in a universal medieval and early modern logic. A beard was a luxury. A common laborer, a blacksmith fearing his beard might catch fire, a baker worried about flowers and sweat, a soldier needing a tight seal for his helmet. These men were often practically, if not legally, compelled to be clean-shaven. Therefore, a man who could afford to maintain a beard, to groom it, to oil it, to present it as a symbol of his freedom from manual grime, was a man who could afford to pay for the privilege. He would journey to the tax collector, pay his fee, and receive a small metal token, often stamped with the year and a symbol of authority. This beard token was a tangible receipt he was expected to carry on his person. Imagine the scene: a merchant, in the midst of a heated negotiation, reaches for his purse and this metal disc clinks together with his coins. It was a perfect piece of fiscal ingenuity. The state had found a way to monetize masculinity and vanity, turning facial hair into a line item on the tax roll and a walking advertisement of one's disposable income. His toilette complete, our bearded guildsman might venture out to the bustling marketplace, his first stop perhaps being for a morning draft. He would not seek wine, the drink of the clergy and the aristocracy, but ale, the hydrating, caloric, and slightly inebriating lifeblood of the common people, consumed by men, women, and even children at every meal, because its brewing process made it safer than water. He hands a coin to the alewife, a formidable businesswoman who manages the brewing in her household. She draws him a tankard from a large barrel. But was this ale any good? Was it watered down, spoiled, or adulterated with dubious ingredients to stretch the supply? This was not a matter of mere disappointment. It was a question of public health, commercial honesty, and the moral economy of the town. And it was enforced by one of the most peculiarly practical officials of the age, the ale conner, or ale taster, appointed by the manor court or the town council. This man's duty was to visit every ale cellar in his jurisdiction and test their wares. His method was as crude as it was effective. He would take a wooden bench, sometimes specifically covered in a particular type of leather, and pour a small amount of the freshly drawn ale onto it. He would then, with great solemnity, sit down upon the damp spot, wearing his official leather breeches. He would remain there for a prescribed amount of time, perhaps conducting other business or simply contemplating his duty. Then, the moment of truth, he would rise. The test was in the sticking. If the bench stuck to his breeches, it was a sign that the ale was of good, sugary, unadulterated quality, its viscosity sufficient to create a bond. If his breeches came away freely, the ale was deemed too thin, likely watered down or poorly brewed, and the alewife would face a stiff fine. It was a form of consumer protection that relied not on chemical analysis, but on the adhesive properties of a fermented beverage and the sensitivity of a man's posterior. It was justice, quite literally, by the seat of one's pants. Perhaps his thirst quenched by a satisfactorily sticky brew, our guildsman decides to buy bread for his household. He approaches the baker, a figure of immense importance in the community, and consequently a figure of constant suspicion. In a world where bread was the absolute staple of the diet, its weight and quality were matters of profound public concern. To cheat on the weight of a loaf was not simple fraud. It was a crime that could destabilize the very trust that held the community together, especially in lean years. The assize of bread and ale in England, and similar laws across Europe, set incredibly precise standards for the weight of a loaf in relation to the current price of grain. The penalties for shortchanging were severe. Heavy fines, time in the pillory where the public could heap abuse and rotten food upon the offender, or even having the offending underweight loaf tied around the baker's neck as a mark of shame. To avoid this fate, bakers developed a clever and deeply ingrained habit born of pure self-preservation. When a customer asked for a dozen loaves, the baker would give them 13. This baker's dozen was a built-in insurance policy. The 13th loaf was a buffer, a sacrificial offering to the gods of accuracy. It ensured that even if one of the other 12 loaves was marginally underweight, the total weight of the batch would almost certainly meet or exceed the legal requirement for 12 full loaves. It was a small act of generosity that was, in its essence, a calculated and desperate act of risk management, a private rule created to circumvent the terrifying rigor of a public one. Our guildsman, his bread secured, now looks down at his own sensible, well-made boots, but his gaze is drawn across the marketplace to a young nobleman, a knight or the son of a local lord who is strutting through the mud and refuse with an air of detached grandeur. The nobleman's shoes are a spectacle unto themselves. They are poulains, the infamous footwear of the late medieval period, characterized by their long, pointed toes that curled upwards like the prow of a ship. The length of this toe was not a matter of personal aesthetic preference. It was a matter of law. Sumptuary legislation could be astonishingly specific, often dictating the exact permitted length of the toe for each social class. A prince's points could extend 2 feet or more, becoming so impractical that they had to be tethered to the knees with delicate chains of silver or gold. A wealthy merchant or guildsman like our man might be legally allowed a toe of a few inches. For the peasant, the poulain was an impossible, illegal fantasy. His shoes were to be blunt, functional, and shaped like actual human feet. These absurd, impractically long shoes were the ultimate walking advertisement of privilege, a visible, unmissable yardstick of status that one literally dragged through the muck and mire of daily life. They declared with every clumsy step that the wearer was so far removed from physical labor that he could afford to be impeded by his own fashion choices. Later in the day, our guildsman might find himself attending a somber event, the funeral of a fellow merchant. The procession winds its way through the narrow streets toward the parish church, a slow-moving river of black-clad mourners. The bell tolls a low, monotonous knell. But even here, in the very heart of grief and ritual, the long arm of the law intervenes. Sumptuary regulations often extended their reach into the realms of mourning, dictating the type, quality, and even the cost of the cloth that could be worn by the bereaved, with rules varying based on one's relation to the deceased and one's station in life. The goal was to prevent ruinous, competitive displays of grief, where families in a fit of pious one-upmanship or social anxiety would bankrupt themselves and to put on a show of mourning that was deemed inappropriate for their rank. An official from the town or the church might very well be present at the church door, his demeanor sober and bureaucratic. As the mourners filed past, his trained fingers might reach out to feel the fabric of a widow's cloak, ensuring it was simple, legally permitted wool, and not the forbidden, luxurious softness of velvet or fine imported silk. Even in the face of death, the social hierarchy had to be maintained, and economic recklessness, even that born of sorrow, had to be prevented. It was a cold, pragmatic imposition of order upon the most turbulent of human emotions. Should our guildsman suffer a fall from his horse, or find himself on the wrong end of a tavern brawl, he might end up in the clutches of a barber surgeon. This individual, identified by the iconic red and white striped pole outside his establishment, the red symbolizing blood and the white representing the bandages used, was a walking paradox of medieval practicality. He was a hybrid professional. In the same chair where he would give you a trim and a shave, he would also, with the same set of tools, pull a painfully rotten tooth, lance a festering boil, set a broken bone, or even perform a rudimentary amputation. The barber surgeon represents a time long before the specialization of modern medicine, when the same hands that held a finely honed razor also held a bone saw. His training was often through apprenticeship and hands-on experience, not university learning. He was a man of action, not theory, his skills a rough and ready blend of observed practice, folklore, and sheer, unflinching nerve. A visit to his shop was a gamble, a place where a simple haircut could, in an emergency, swiftly transition into a life-altering medical procedure. If our guildsman were to undertake a journey to another town, his travels would reveal other, wider-scale testaments to this obsessive regulation. On the outskirts of a vast, dark woodland, he would pass a moss-covered, deeply carved boundary stone. This stone marked the edge of a royal forest, a place where the king's forest laws held absolute sway. Here, the very concept of nature was different. The deer, the boar, the hare, and even the leaves on the trees were the direct property of the crown. To harm a deer here was not simple poaching. It was a crime of lèse majesté, an insult to the king himself, and the punishments were correspondingly brutal: blinding, mutilation, or death by hanging. The forest was not a public wilderness for foraging and hunting. It was a private, walled-off larder and recreational park for the monarchy and their favored nobles. Its draconian laws, enforced by a network of foresters, wardens, and gamekeepers who possessed the power of life and death over any commoner who dared to trespass or take a rabbit for a starving family. Down at the bustling port of a coastal city, our guildsmen would see the literal lifeblood of the English economy being loaded onto sturdy merchant ships, great cumbersome sacks of raw wool. This golden fleece was the foundation of the nation's wealth. But this trade was not a free market. The export of raw wool was often heavily restricted, taxed, or even temporarily banned to protect and nurture the domestic cloth-making industry. The goal was to force foreign nations to buy expensive, finished English broadcloth rather than the cheaper raw material. Officials would be swarming the docks, inspecting manifests, checking cargo, and ensuring that the kingdom's most valuable commodity was not being smuggled out to enrich economic rivals in Flanders or Italy. It was an early, rigorous form of protectionist economic policy, a mercantilist doctrine enforced with the full rigor of the state to guarantee that the profits of this primary resource remained at home. And within the crowded, teeming streets of the town itself, he would witness the practicalities of medieval urban planning being actively enforced. A town official, the clerk of the market, might be using a marked rod or a length of chain to ensure that the stalls of butchers, fishmongers, and other vendors did not encroach too far into the narrow thoroughfare. This market width or stall frontage rule was a simple but essential measure to prevent the chaotic, impassable snarls that could choke the life out of a medieval town. A cart carrying vital goods, a knight on horseback, a procession of pilgrims, all needed to be able to pass. By legally enforcing a clear passage, the authorities ensured that the vital arteries of commerce and communication remain open, a humble but crucial regulation for daily survival. Perhaps the most bizarre, and to the modern mind, surreal of all these rules was the one that governed not humans but animals. There are numerous well-documented historical records from across Europe of animals being put on trial for crimes. A pig that had maimed or killed a child, a troop of locusts that had devastated a crop, a herd of rats infesting a grain store, all could be formally arrested, imprisoned, tried in an ecclesiastical or secular court with a full legal defense provided by an appointed lawyer, and if found guilty, publicly executed, often by hanging or burning. These proceedings were conducted with all the solemnity and procedural rigor of a human trial. The logic, deeply rooted in a medieval worldview, was that the animal, as a creature of God, possessed a will and could be tempted by Satan into sin. Therefore, it was morally culpable for its actions. The trial and punishment were not merely about retribution. They were about restoring a moral and cosmic order that had been disrupted by the beast's transgression. These animal trials represent a breathtaking blend of nascent legalism and profound superstition, a testament to a society that saw the devil's hand in every misfortune and believed that divine harmony could only be reestablished through formal judicial ceremony, even if the defendant was a squealing pig in the dock. Finally, even in the most intimate, sacred, and sorrowful of moments, the unwritten rules of tradition and the written rules of health dictated procedure. The washing and preparation of a body for burial was a ritual steeped in reverence, love, and a powerful undercurrent of pragmatic caution. The women of the household or the village, the traditional caretakers of the dead, would perform this duty with a quiet, solemn grace. In times of plague, this ritual became a frontline defense. They would use vinegar-infused water and strong, purifying herbs like rosemary and thyme to cleanse the body. This was done not only as a final act of physical care and respect, but as a desperate, pragmatic measure against the miasmatic airs they believed carried the pestilence. The scene would be one of hushed voices, the slosh of water in a basin, the scent of vinegar and herbs cutting through the smell of death. It was a quiet, somber act of love and duty, conducted under the long shadow of mortality. A final, gentle rule observed not for any king or bishop, but for the dead themselves and for the terrified, grieving community they left behind. It was a rule written not on parchment, but on the human heart, a final, dignified ordering of chaos in a world so often defined by it. All these rules, from the grand proclamations read in the marketplace to the humble, unspoken rituals of the deathbed, wove a complex, inescapable web of control, tradition, and meaning around medieval life. They were the desperate, ingenious, and often contradictory responses of a society that was fragile, fearful of both earthly and divine wrath, and fiercely committed to a hierarchical vision of the universe. They tell a story not just of monarchs and popes, but of bakers and alewives, of bearded merchants and lonely night watchmen, of barbers who were also surgeons, and of pigs that stood accused. It was a world where the law touched everything, from the froth on your morning ale to the preparation of a loved one's corpse. A world where the quest for order extended into the most unexpected corners of existence, creating a reality that was, by turns, brutally pragmatic, strangely surreal, and profoundly, inescapably human. And as we contemplate this vast and intricate tapestry, its details can slowly blur and soften, its countless threads merging into a single, quiet, gray blanket of history, pulling us down into a deep and dreamless sleep.